I did want to talk to you about your column in the Spectator. No, which one was this? This was, I believe. Anyway, listen.
You lose track, mate. I lose
Spectator. You pinpointed the fact that when right wing people are said to have rioted or said to have done anything wrong or maybe committed some kind of atrocity, we say, oh, well, the reason is they're right wing and therefore they're violent. That somehow or other the orthodoxy is we link right wingism to violence, and yet when there is an Islamic terrorist act, what we say then is, well, you can't blame Islam, that's a peaceful religion. And it is by this disassociation that I think the public become more and more suspicious of the government. We are required to exonerate Islam, but to vilify anyone right-wing and to assume that because they're right-wing, they must be violent. And it is this.
Right. And of course, you get people like Tony Blair and various other politicians standing up and say, and when an Islamist terrorist atrocity does occur, says, well, this is completely against what the Quran says, as if they were Quranic experts.
Yeah.
You know, Tony Blair and Jack Straw and people like that. But you saw it very clearly last week with the appalling attacks upon Jewish people in Amsterdam. And I must have read, because I was going to write about it, I've written about it for The Spectator this week, I must have read about 30, 40 accounts of what happened. Not one of them mentioned Muslims. Not one.
Really?
And yet, a Dutch politician said that the attacks were carried out by Moroccan Dutch people on motor scooters. So we're beginning to edge towards a certain truth there, aren't we? You know, we're beginning to see what it is. And it was largely Muslim rioters with a few of the useful idiots who are Hamas groupies on the far left hanging on.
Yeah.
And yet they're exonerated. Islam is exonerated from any problem at all. And it becomes infuriating for ordinary people because they get this, you get this, I get this, everyone else gets this, but we're not allowed to say it. And if you do say it, then people say you're Islamophobic. But I'm not Islamophobic. I'm just saying that the majority of people who attacked Jewish people in Amsterdam last week were Muslims. They were.
Exactly right. And of course, the suspect in Southport was Welsh. He's from Cardiff. We better not go into that, but you know what I'm saying.
Well, indeed.
It is always this, the authorities are very quick to blame anyone unless it's to do with Islam. And one thing I would say is that of course, this is not to condemn every Muslim in the country or in the world, but I think I'm right in saying there are no real other religions that are connected so regularly to terrorist incidents, are there? It's always Islam. It's always Islam. You don't get Catholic terrorists, don't even get Jewish terrorists.
No, you don't.
And yet we're not allowed to talk about it.
The cretins of the left will say, well, look at the First Baptist Church in America. And it hasn't committed any terrorist atrocities. It's just been a bit homophobic here and there. Very homophobic here and there, indeed. And they also say, well, look at Uganda, which is passing laws to be, which are homophobic themselves. But there is no terrorism, pretty much. There's been a little bit of Buddhist terrorism in Thailand, Myanmar. There's been a little bit, but nothing that compares. If you read about a terrorist atrocity, the chances are that 99 times out of 100, it will be Islamist. You know?
Yeah.
And we know that. And everybody knows that.
Yeah.
And yet it's something which you're not really allowed to say. I mean, I've said it just so that people like Stuart Lee, who says, we always say we can't say this and then we go ahead and say them. Well, I can say to you now But, you know, I know that if I wrote it for a newspaper, I wouldn't be allowed to say it.
That is true. And, of course, the other thing is that when far-right people are responsible for heinous acts, you know, as I think you wrote, very, very rarely actually are there such events that you could describe as far-right terrorism. But when that does happen, then it's because they're right-wing. They're right-wing and therefore violent. When the authorities are finally forced to concede that some kind of terrorist act or some kind of atrocity was committed by Muslims, then those Muslims become mad. They're insane. They've
That's
got
right.
mental.
They become either mad. Firstly, they become mad, and we say, well, then they're insane. And you can make that allegation about any act of terrorism, that it's an act of insanity, because it targets people indiscriminately and means that they die. You can say that about anyone.
Yeah.
But they also then say, and they're not proper Muslims. This is what they always say. They're not proper Muslims. And, you know, it doesn't matter how often they go, Allahu Akbar. It doesn't matter how often they do that. It doesn't matter if their name is Mohammed Ramadan Muhammad. It doesn't matter. They're not proper Muslims if they commit these atrocities. And I'm sure there are loads of Muslims in the country, millions of Muslims in the country, who are embarrassed and enraged by these terrorist acts. But there's still a problem at the heart of Islam. And it's not me saying this. Mehdi Hassan, who's a very left-wing, pro-Muslim commentator, has said, you know, we have to face up to the fact that Islam has a real problem with Jewish people. And it's about time they did face up to that.
Yeah, and it's about time the authorities, the government, the police, the Crown Prosecution Service stopped treating the population of Britain like a bunch of kids. They infantilise us, don't think we can be trusted with this information, and that all feeds into their horror at the very spectre of what might be vaguely described as Islamophobia, although it isn't Islamophobic to state the facts. They think it is. It's all crazy, Rod.